Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Show, where we talk about all components of business and how to utilize them for exponential growth. My name is Athin Cassiotis. I'm a business growth expert where I help business owners grow and scale to create wealth and freedom. And today, I have an awesome guest, and her name is Jacqui Brauman, and she helps women facing a legal conflict to confidently take control of themselves without spending tens of thousands on legal fees, without having decisions taken out of their hands and spending years in the legal system, and without any shame or embarrassment of fear of making a mistake. And Jacqui is the founder and CEO of Legally Wise Women, which is a social enterprise to address the gap in women accessing legal services by helping them to know where to start and guiding them to finding the resources they need, including their own wisdom. And Jacqui is an accredited specialist and an award-winning lawyer. She has a NMAS mediator, a collaboratively trained dispute resolution practitioner, and she has written and published 3 legal guides. Welcome, Jacqui Brauman, and thank you for being on my show.
Such a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. I'm sure it's going to be an amazing show for everyone watching and listening today. So you're a very successful entrepreneur. So for those people who don't know who you are, please introduce yourself by telling us about you and your journey.
Sure. I think I always knew I wanted to be a business owner, but still took a bit more of a traditional pathway with doing the law degree, but then eventually started a law firm in 2012. So I also run a law firm in Central Victoria. So I've been running that for about 11 years. And so I suppose being an entrepreneur, you do it sort of straight away coming into a lot of personal development. You don't actually think that that's what's going to happen when you start running a business, but that's certainly what happened for me. And you learn a lot more aspects of business than you ever knew, and you start learning from other industries, and you start really looking at what's fulfilling you and what your values are and things like that, particularly after, a decade in business. You're like, well, why am I doing this? So that's the firm. And then I guess Legally Wise Women sort of sprung out of some of my dissatisfaction with being in the legal industry. I'd thought of the concept back in 2018, and in 2020, when COVID hit, there was some incubators that came out through the College of Law, and so I successfully submitted to develop the project through that incubator through a 12-month process. And so it was born that way. I didn't actually know where the concept was headed, except that I wanted it to be an access to justice project and sort of focus on legal literacy, particularly for women, so that I actually feel like I'm giving something back. I think that, particularly in the legal industry, we tend to hide behind our knowledge and some, walls and things to make ourselves sometimes seem more valuable. But I think that can often just add more fear and overwhelm for people. And sometimes they're too scared to actually contact a lawyer. And so I think, with consumers becoming more powerful, and there's certainly been shake-ups in lots of other industries, it's coming for the legal industry. And I suppose I want to be at the forefront of helping people shake it up.
Yeah, love it. Great story there, and interesting, and love the new social enterprise, and I guess the contribution back, right? Which is always to be able to help people, especially those in need, that may or may not necessarily put their hand up, but know that they need it at the same time. So yeah. And how did it all start? Like, what made you get into law? It's an interesting question about people doing that from the start. Did you just be like, I want to be a lawyer when I grow up, or what's it?
Not at all. I think some people do, but I don't know. I think I was a fairly angry teenager. I think I was, always jumping onto a cause, particularly, a human rights cause or an environment cause or something like that. So it really came from the perspective of actually wanting to make a difference. And then you actually go through the law degree, and there's an element of brainwashing through that process. And then you actually have to find a job. And, human rights and environmental law are fairly niche areas. So you end up just actually serving the community that you're in and helping people. So, there's an element of helping, of course. But then once I went into business, you realize how many people you do turn away because they can't afford it, or you realize how many people are not actually even contacting you to prevent a legal problem coming, and they come to you when it's too late. And you're like, well, I know the system and you should have come to me like 6 to 12 months ago. And now there's not much that I can do. You're a bit stuck. And this is actually going to cost heaps more than it would have done. And so you start seeing some of these things where you could serve better. And particularly, I started thinking about, well, I don't want to contribute to harm. I want to actually prevent suffering and harm. And, you also see some horrible behavior within the legal community as well, and the gouging of costs and all those horrible things which create the horror stories that make people scared. I just want to turn that around so that people can have better experiences.
Yeah, I love that. It's always interesting to know, the driving factor, and then how it's come full circle. You've gone through the system, and now you can still do what you need to do there, but also, go back to those roots, I guess, of helping more people. I love it there, and I think well needed in that way. I was fortunate enough to live with a lawyer for many years, so I sort of got to ask a lot of great questions. A lot of people get that opportunity right there, so for you to provide that platform, it was great for people to get those questions answered easily, which is awesome. So I know with Legally Wise Women, you've got 4 pillars, right? A part of that. Just initially, we can delve maybe separately into each one, but do you want to share a little bit about these 4 pillars?
Yeah, so when I looked at the education and sort of content that I was putting out in Legally Wise Women for about 2 years, it wasn't until about the last 12 months or so that I realized, well, actually, they sort of all do fit into these 4 pillars. So they fit into support, so finding the right people to have around you. But there's also an element of supporting yourself, which sort of comes more into the power pillar, self-regulation, being able to access your brain under stress to actually make decisions, because so many people come to us so highly emotive that they can't even determine what they actually want out of a process. Of course, there's an element of skill as well. So not only upskilling yourself in some negotiation tactics, but also the skill of being able to keep someone to account if you are working to a lawyer. So understanding the engagement there that you have with a lawyer, and having a bit more of an understanding of the process that you have ahead of you, instead of you sort of handing your life over to someone and just being taken down a pathway, which can be a very costly pathway if you don't actually pull it up and control it at some point. And then there's also this wisdom element as well. And that sort of brings in more of an intention and an energy focus, which a lot of lawyers, definitely shy away from. But, if you approach a legal battle coming from a place of wanting to be vindictive and teaching the other person a lesson and wanting vengeance, it's going to cost you a whole lot more time and money and stress than if you come to it with much more integrity and poise, and actually think about who you want to be through the process. And so that's the element of being wise and approaching it from that sort of perspective as well.
Yeah, cool. Love it how you've, it's good, when we have done something for a while, we're able to simplify it like that. It's easy for people to digest and then be able to, take that on in and upskill themselves, or, look for help in different ways. So I love the how you've simplified that very easily. And let's delve a little bit further into this, right? Because I think there's more into them. So let's start on support a little bit more, right? And having, I guess, the support around us, of people, and support from resources and things like that. So what can we expect, and what should we be looking for, with support?
Yes. So, I start with where you don't want your support to come from. And where you don't want your support to come from is, your Facebook business group. You don't want to just jump on there and vent with your problem, because you're going to get a whole lot of other people venting back at you, and not necessarily any qualified advice or useful information at all. And we also don't necessarily want our support from our family or friends either. They're well-intended, of course, but they're often very biased, and they want the best from you, and that can emotionally turn them down a pathway that might not be helpful for you. A lot of people actually don't find enough support from counsellors or psychologists when they are going through a protracted, really difficult issue. When you're facing a legal challenge, not necessarily a business legal challenge, but certainly personal life sort of ones, there's often a lot of grief and other sort of emotions tied up in it as well, which can really affect our ability to resolve a matter. And so actually having some broader professionals around you to support you through that. I've often also found a lot of people confuse their lawyer as someone that they can actually vent to and get some kind of emotional support from as well. But that's certainly not, the lawyer's role. And so trying to find that from your lawyer is not the appropriate place either. So just understanding that relationship too can be important. There's more and more people sort of on the outskirts of the legal industry as well. So there are legal coaches, and there are, dispute resolution trainers and communication providers and all those sorts of things to sort of help potentially upskill in certain areas as well. But then it also comes down to actually finding and hiring the right person to work with, because unlike some other professions where I think we're very comfortable getting second and third opinions, with lawyers, it just seems that we tend to go with the first person that we get connected with, or just don't question what we're being told. But again, as a powerful consumer, I think we should very much be questioning, and we should actually find someone we should work with. And so I do give a lot of advice about what to be looking for with lawyers, trying to help educate people on the fact that we actually have very broad practice areas. And so what, your person down the street who referred you to someone that they did their conveyance for is not the same person that you should use for your business dispute. Actually being able to find someone who is really good in the area that you're working with and what to look for. But then also what to know, how lawyers charge and what to ask, what questions to ask around charging. And then going even further, and how a lawyer personally communicates. So if you're going to be working with someone for months, you're going to want to be able to trust and feel like you're able to tell them what you need to tell them, but also that they're actually going to respond to you, that you understand what they're saying, that they're not condescending when they talk to you, that they don't dismiss certain aspects that you find are important, that they explain what the options are. So all those sorts of things are really important. So that is really key. It's a huge area of support, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And you touched on some good skills there, I think, as well, in that, which is important too, like you mentioned. And I say a similar thing to my clients and people that I help, because I've done an MBA, and I'm like, don't worry about doing the MBA. I'll upskill you on all these areas. And some people think, oh, do I really need it? But, you need to know, just like law, you need to know enough about it. Just like business, you need to know enough about each area so you can ask the right questions. So when I go to, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's an accountant, I am literally saying, this is what I'm planning to do. This is what I do. Am I doing this right? Can I do this? Can I do that? I'm not letting them, I'm actually taking charge because I have enough information. And then it's a higher level conversation, right? You're actually getting to some really cool things instead of just putting all your power or something, like giving it all to them and just thinking that they're going to do it. It's really, you can really get some great outcomes, I think, in those times.
Absolutely, for sure. And that touches then on the power pillar as well, which is very much that you actually want control. You want to be the project manager of this matter. You don't want to be handing it over to someone else because they have their own interests and you don't want it run by them in their interests. You want to manage it. And so having enough knowledge about how to manage that engagement. And then, the power element also has more about self-regulation and things like that as well, because again, coming back to decision making, we want to make sure that we are making decisions well thought through and not decisions when we're under stress. And if we are in a stressful situation, coming down to some skills, how to actually reduce your stress in the moment so that you know that you can make a self-supported decision as well. So I find that self-regulation seems to go out the window as soon as there is a legal challenge. We tend to be fairly well considered in most other aspects, but for some reason, a legal challenge, and potentially it's just because of the uncertainty and the lack of knowledge, just creates so much more extra stress and overwhelm that, yeah, as I said, self-regulation just seems to go out the window, and people just vent, and they can't actually pin down what the issues are. They can't think logically. And so again, it's bringing it back down to teaching people how to do that as well.
Yeah, I love that. And that touches more on the wisdom side of things as well, that you were talking about there. And I think it's extremely important, understanding how you do. I think everybody's a little bit different, right, with how they self-regulate. Like some people are quite aware and you can sort of do it yourself. Other people might need somebody else to help them, whether that's a family member, a friend, a coach, right, or someone like that, to just allow them to bring them back, to central. Because I know with decision making, with emotions, if you're too high in emotion or too low, it's not just the low ones, it can be too high, can cloud the judgment, right, of the decision, which may not be the right decision at that time. So
yeah, so true. And that's a really good point. People do self-regulate differently. And if you're a fairly controlled person, you might appear like you're self-regulating because there's not too much of an external reaction, but in fact you're ruminating and you're stuck, and you're not able to make any progress or decision because inside there's a lot of turmoil, and you're not actually feeling any of your feelings because you're shutting it down. And that's almost as bad as someone who's super reactive. So it's a really good point.
Yeah, love it. So true. So I think especially, I know you're talking more about women and it's probably there, but I'm going to go on the man side just to give a different opinion right now. Is that I know with me that I think men are sort of learnt to like push down the emotion a little bit more, let's just say generally now, whereas women probably it's more natural for them to share the emotion, which is great, as well. So that's something that I'm learning, over time with my wife, of how I can do that better. And then it's probably, the other side with the women, like with my wife, for the example of learning more about how to not get overly into the emotion sometimes when they're in those moments, and how to go back to the equilibrium, so to speak, and look at it logically for certain things like law or certain important decision-making times like that. So it's sort of like understanding that there's no right or wrong, there's just different ways of doing things, and it's understanding what you need more of in that particular moment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, actually touching on some of those generalizations and biases that we have about the genders as well. And you're right that we need an understanding that there are differences. And the problem, I suppose, with the legal industry is because it's based on hundreds of years of precedent, a lot of biases are actually built in. And so the male biases are built in, and they're built into what's called the reasonable person test. And so male reactions fit within the reasonable person test, but then typical female reactions don't fit within the reasonable person test. So if a male, for example, does show emotion, it's often anger more than upset, and that is an acceptable display of upset. Whereas if a female displays anger, that might not be acceptable. Or if a female gets overly teary and can't communicate, they're often dismissed as being indecisive or unreliable in the legal system. And it's knowing some of these biases that you're up against to even just be able to be aware what you're going into as well.
Yeah, I love that. So true. And it's so interesting, this deep stuff, right, about how the system works. And, I think, just being aware of that. And there are so many cognitive biases. I put it out to everybody to just Google this, right, after here, because, little things, even like people have biases if people think, are perceived as more, attractive or not. There is a bias, right? There's so many biases that are so interesting, right? For various things. It's like what we wear. Give an example. If someone comes in, draggy clothes, hoodie or something like that, you might be like, oh, who is this person? But if someone dresses up, whether it's a man in a suit or a woman in a nice dress, whatever, like that, all of a sudden you're like, oh, cool, who is this person, right? You've already got this cognitive unconscious bias. So I think understanding these and having more awareness around them and more, allowing people to be in that moment and just everyone's at their own stage is a great saying. When I did NLP, mindset master practitioner training, was that everyone's doing the best they can with what they've got. I think it's a great thing because we're all on a journey of growth in our own way. That lens of curiosity, I think, is best. Is not be like judging the person, going, oh, why is this person crying? Or why is this person getting angry in these examples? It's like, okay, they're angry, they're crying. Like, what is this about? Let me ask a few more questions, see what's going on in there, and see how we can, help them as well.
Wouldn't it be great if our juries had NLP training before they sat on juries? I mean, that would make just a world of difference. Because again, we're being judged by our peers in that sort of an element. And the stand of what our peers may be could be concerning sometimes, couldn't it?
Interesting. Might be a new business idea. First year to try and get that involved. Interesting stuff. It would be very interesting. I think getting people out there to have this awareness will definitely help. I think it's happening. It's just how quickly from there. But that's I mean, and again, the legal industry moves very slowly. It's hard for laws to keep up with the change of pace of society as well. And then even thinking about memory, for example, again, we now know much more psychologically and neurologically about the memory and how unreliable it is. And yet we're supposed to give evidence and swear on our evidence of the truthfulness of it, even if it was, 10 years ago. And I mean, how many of us really, can even remember what we said yesterday? Yeah, it's so true. And obviously different people have better memories than others, but how do you quantify that? And then how do you help remember that? And it's like we're actually remembering the memory, from my understanding as well. We're not actually remembering the moment. So if you remember it enough, you could actually potentially change the narrative, apparently, right? In the memory. It's so interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting and scary when you're relying on it. And so I guess coming back around to engaging with the legal industry, I guess a lot of the moral of the story is try not to go down a traditional pathway because of all the inbuilt flaws. And so we do want to be looking for alternatives, and we want to be building, as you said before, like enough broad knowledge to know what alternatives you have access to, or at least where your first point of call is to find out what your alternatives are. Because there are a lot of free dispute resolution services, and particularly if it's not a technical legal challenge and it's more of a factual issue, or it's more of an emotional family issue, or even if it's, a breakdown of business, so it's a breakdown of values and personal relationship. It's not something that really needs lawyers. Go to a mediator, there is a small business ombudsman in Australia that helps business owners that are falling apart. If you've got consumer issues, we've got consumer affairs and fair trading in every state. We have a lot of ombudsmans for different industries. So we have small business commissioners in each state as well that also have free dispute resolution services. And then also women's legal services in every state. So there are a lot of providers and a lot of places to start. And I think people just don't know where to start. And so they put their head in the sand and they give up their rights, or they just let it go away, or, let it stew for too long, and then it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah, definitely. Love those points. Really powerful. And I think let's just touch a bit more on the personal side now, because I think wills and estates is a big one, right? To get right, and can create a lot of family conflicts, and people should be, focusing on this. And whether you're a business owner or not a business owner, it doesn't matter really on this. It's relevant for everyone. So what do you think people should be thinking about when they're like, creating that will?
Oh, so many things to think about. Well, firstly, you need to think about, well, who's going to have control of the process. So I like talking about who the roles are in estate planning. And so knowing who your executor is going to be, knowing who's going to control things so that what you want is actually going to happen. If you've got young children, who is going to be your guardian? A religious godparent appointment is not a legal guardian appointment. So you do actually have to have a will with a guardian named. And I always say that you don't want your guardian who's looking after the kids to also be the sole person in charge of the money, because that's a conflict of interest. So again, like, who's going to look after the money for your kids until they're old enough? So those are some really key roles that you need to be thinking about. We also need to be thinking about what is actually covered by our will and what isn't. So there's actually a lot of assets that are not covered by our will. Jointly owned assets, for those as business owners, assets owned by your business or assets owned in a trust are not your assets that you can cover by a will. So how do you make sure control of these pockets of wealth that you're building actually go to the right people? Superannuation. For a lot of us, super is one of our first or second biggest assets, particularly when you think about there's a death benefit attached to it, a life insurance component. So even young people who start working get an industry super fund, and there's automatically 200,000 of life insurance. So they say, oh, I'm not worth anything. Well, no, if you pass away, there's a lump sum coming. So, you do have to think about it. Superannuation is not covered by your will. And so we need to make sure that this big asset that we're growing actually goes to the right people as well. And then thinking about the tax elements and things there too. I mean, not to mention that potentially the states are looking at introducing death taxes, which again will just be another thing to think about. How do I make sure my wealth goes to the right person, and how do I make sure I minimize any tax that there is? So lots of things.
Lots of things. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, because I think it's definitely something we should be thinking about there. And there's one thing that I know a little bit more about that maybe you can share a bit on, is about testamentary trust wills, which I think are great, from my understanding, for protection as well as tax minimization. And maybe with this new tax laws, maybe might even be even more important, coming up there. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more, about them and their benefits?
Yeah, sure. So when we say testamentary trust, we're often referring to a testamentary discretionary trust, which is like a family trust that you set up in your will. Whereas in fact, a testamentary trust is any form of trust that you set up in a will, because it's testamentary, it's under your will. So there are lots of types. You can have a life interest, you can have a minor's trust. So a minor's trust is an automatic form of trust that is set up when someone's under 18. It's a very simple form of trust, but it is a testamentary trust. Protective trust, special disability trust, we've got all sorts of trusts that we can utilize, particularly when there's vulnerable beneficiaries or younger beneficiaries, or a beneficiary, for example, that receives a Centrelink pension or something like that, and you don't want to impact them. But then when the form of trust you're talking about, the testamentary discretionary trust, this is when you want your wealth to transfer to your beneficiaries in an investment vehicle that they can continue to grow, rather than their inheritance just coming into their own name and off they go into the sunset with some cash in the bank. A testamentary trust sets up another entity. So their inheritance goes in there. And if they're an able-bodied child and they're, well established, then they just control their own trust. It's fairly straightforward, but it is a separate entity from themselves. And so again, business owners may be worried about getting too many assets into their name, because, if you've got the potential to be sued, or you've personally guaranteed things through your business, you don't want as many assets in your own name for asset protection. So your inheritance goes into a trust. It is protected from bankruptcy claims. You can also structure the testamentary trust to protect it from potential splits from your de facto or from your partner, so that it wouldn't be included in the property pool of a family relationship. So you've got those couple of asset protection elements, but the other thing you also have is tax benefits. So for a long time, family trusts were the rage, particularly accountants suggesting a lot of people setting those up, and they're still pretty good. But the government has wound back a lot of the tax benefits in an ordinary family trust. For some reason, the government has forgotten about testamentary discretionary trusts in a will. And so we still have those old tax benefits in testamentary trusts where there aren't penalty tax rates on a testamentary trust. For example, if you got your inheritance now, and you have a couple of children still in primary school or secondary school and they're being privately schooled, you can take income out of your testamentary trust at marginal rates. So you can have about $19,000 a year tax-free per child, which will help pay their school fees. So, there's some real tax benefits there as well to consider. So again, if you're interested in, some generations need to talk to their parents to make sure their parents do it for them. But certainly thinking about the next generation, if you're growing your wealth, making sure it's protected in the hands of the next generation could be something that you find important.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for sharing that. I know it's extremely valuable and going into more detail there, because I think everyone should be knowing about this stuff for the next generation where possible. So let's talk a little bit more just quickly about business now, where just generally, like, what legal documents, like what are you seeing, I guess, are the biggest issues here? Or what key legal documents should we be having in our business where, we can obviously protect ourselves, from further issues?
Yeah. So, one of the typical problems I see is when people start up a small business and, it's amazing and they're going into business with their friend or their family member and nothing's ever going to go wrong. We're going to go in and we're going to make heaps of money. And their accountant sets up a structure for them, or they're just in a partnership, but they never get any legal advice around how to regulate that relationship between the two of them. And then there's some kind of problem. And then the problem blows up. There's nothing to regulate it. And so, at the start of your business, or you can put it in place at any time when things are still good, you want some kind of shareholder agreement, partnership agreement, something like that between the business owners, because you just need to regulate the relationship. Then the other things, I guess, are over time, as your business gets more and more complex, you're spending a couple of thousand at least a year on an accountant. You should probably spend the same on a lawyer just to be preventing things from happening. Just like your health, prevention's better than a cure. So let's make sure your terms and conditions are up to date. Let's make sure you're getting your employment agreements up to date. Let's make sure you've got your services agreements up to date. So just like really tightening up those sorts of things and spending a bit of time every year on just going, okay, well, what should I look at next to just make sure that I'm protected here? And then there's elements of making sure, you've got adequate insurance to cover any risks as well. So, those are the main things that I see blow up for business owners, is just not putting things in place early enough when in fact, again, maybe they're just worried that it will cost far more than it does. But the dispute costs far more than putting the small agreement in place in the first place.
Definitely love that. Thank you for sharing. Completely agree. So important, all of those documents, and like you said, better with your health now rather than having big health complications and having big hospital bills and stuff later down the line. So very, very powerful. And I know you've written and published 3 legal guides as well. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about them and how they help us?
Yeah, well, again, I suppose they're primarily focused on estate planning. And I mean, estate planning has an element of succession planning in it for business as well. So the first one I wrote was called In Case of Emergency, and it is focusing on, you know, the people generally in their 30s and 40s who have young children and haven't addressed the guardianship component, don't understand the value of testamentary trusts and those sorts of things, and powers of attorney as well. Because again, I suppose if you're in those age categories, if you're going to pass away, it's usually an accident, and we usually don't pass away suddenly. So there's often an element where you actually need a power of attorney there as well to keep things going. So yeah, the first one was In Case of Emergency. Then I did one on digital assets as well. So there's so many elements in our life which is online these days. We've got accounts all over the place. What accounts can we pass on? What accounts are actually personal contracts which end when we pass away? What can we recover from those accounts? You know, your iTunes and your Spotify accounts, where you're buying all this music and having these subscriptions, you don't own any of it, so it all disappears. Your Facebook account, how do you recover your photos that are in there? You have cloud storage devices. If you're building IP, if you're a writer, if you're a photographer, all those sorts of things, there's actually value in the assets that you're storing in a cloud. How do you make sure you recover them? So a book around digital assets. And then I went back and addressed what I call the sandwich generation. So it's probably the people in their 60s who have adult children, and they also have aging parents. And so the sandwich generation, if something goes wrong for them, you know, they're the ones holding everything together. No generation on either side of them is really going to help, but also they're the ones that will bear the brunt if it happens to either of the other generations as well. So just making sure that they're looking after themselves and making sure they know what questions to be asking their parents and their kids.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. All very valuable information there for people to know to protect themselves and help themselves going forward. And yeah, just one thing around coaching, right? I know before this we were talking a little bit about it, and I think coaching, mentoring is extremely important, right? Whether it's business, in life, you know, to help move us forward. Or I'd love to hear from your perspective of your experiences around, you know, coaching, mentoring, how it's helped you in life or business.
I engaged in coaching fairly early in the business because I guess I realized, as we often do, how little we actually know once we get into the deep end. And also, I also think that a lot of lawyers aren't necessarily good business people either. And so I actually wanted to learn from other industries too. And I think business coaches can then start asking you questions, better questions, which then you actually can reflect on and address things which you wouldn't have otherwise done. But also, even if you're working one-on-one with a coach, but I've also found like peer coaching really good as well, masterminding and other sort of group environments just as useful, because you can learn so much from what other people are doing in other spaces. And have them sometimes call you out on things and just hold a mirror up for you as well can be really useful.
Yeah, I love that. Completely agree. You know, so powerful there. And I'm the same. Love the one-on-one as well as the group mastermind sense of learning from each other at the same time. And powerful show today. So much value is being given. As we're wrapping up, what one key piece of advice would you like to give to all the entrepreneurs watching and listening today?
One key piece of advice. I don't know. Have I given lots and lots?
I don't know. Which one should I pick from today, or something new, whatever you feel like?
One key piece of advice. Let's see, in life. I don't know. Be kind to your mother. That's a huge question. Know thyself. Know thyself. Isn't that just a lifelong journey?
Definitely. Yes, knowing yourself and knowing what you don't know, and going out there to find out what that is, so you can be better at it, right? So love that. So simple and so effective in that way too. So yeah, we connected through our networks. Learned about your awesome journey from, you know, being a solicitor to being the principal solicitor and CEO of TBA Law, as well as Legally Wise Women. Amazing woman. I'm sure you continue to help women facing legal conflict to confidently take control for themselves. Very grateful that we connected and look forward to working with you. So, Jacqui, how can people find you and get in contact with you?
So as you said, there's the law firm, TBA Law. My personal email is on that website, so that's easy to contact me for actual legal services. But as I said, you know, Legally Wise Women's the passion project, so it has a website as well. It has the social media, so you can find all those, and I'm sure they'll be in the show notes or there'll be links somewhere. But a really great place is for those women who want to connect through Legally Wise Women. Facebook group for free is legal support for women. Jump in there, and it's the first place to start, really, to start finding out some resources and some educational pieces.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely check out Jacqui in all those spots, and yeah, get into that Facebook group and everything. We'll definitely have links and stuff in the show notes down there to check it out and get in contact, because very knowledgeable, as we've all heard today. And thank you to everyone for watching and listening to this show where we talk about everything on business growth. And please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube is Athin Cassiotis, or visit my website, athincassiotis.com. If you want to grow and scale your business, you reach out to me on any platform to see if we're a good fit. I completely agree with you, or do I? They don't wear your nose if you tune in next time. So until next time, remember that our business grows when we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. So remember to design your growth and results.